The Kentucky Wildcats are looking to improve to 7-0, and they very well could do it on top of not another strong offensive performance, but on their defense.
You are Locked On Kentucky, your daily podcast on the Kentucky Wildcats, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, what's going on, Big Blue Nation? Welcome on into Locked On Kentucky, your daily Kentucky Wildcats podcast. I'm your host, Lance Dawe, and on today's episode of Locked On Kentucky, we are going to be previewing Kentucky basketball's matchup with the Georgia State Panthers. Obviously, the game against Western Kentucky, offensively, some things went wrong for the Wildcats, and even if they go wrong in this game, I believe Kentucky's going to have the chance to have a strong defensive performance and win through their defense. Also on today's episode, going to have another segment of Mark It Down. Got a hot take coming for you in this Georgia State game built upon that Kentucky defense. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start this season with a big return on FanDuel because new customers can place a $5 bet and get started with $150 in bonus bets if they win their first $5 bet. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started. Thank you guys so much for making Locked On Kentucky your first listen every single day. Want to remind everyone out there that we are free and available on all platforms. And if you are watching on YouTube, I would greatly appreciate it if you subscribed there. And if you're listening on podcast, I would also appreciate it if you subscribed there as well. All right, let's go ahead and get into it. Actually, before I get into it, I want to ask you guys off the top. Normally, I ask you guys at the end of the preview. I want to go ahead and ask you guys now. Give me your final score predictions for this game up front, because there are some differing opinions that you could have out there, especially after seeing what happened against Western Kentucky. Could Kentucky maybe not score as many points as they should against the Panthers tomorrow night? Or maybe do you think they get back on track and they're able to put up possibly another 100 points? We'll have to wait and see. Okay. As we've done for all of these previews, we're going to talk about what we know about Georgia State, what we know that they do well, what they struggle with. We're going to break down some of the individual important performers on the opposing team, and then we're going to give our predictions here. So let's go ahead and start with their head coach, as we normally do, Jonas Hayes, who is in his third season as a Division I head coach. He was formerly at Xavier and Georgia. At Xavier, he was an interim and an assistant coach. At Georgia, I believe he was there from 2013 to 2018 on both of those staffs for quite some time. In his third season, though, he is 25-40 with the Georgia State Panthers, projected this season by KenPom to finish 14-16 or 14-17, actually. 9-9 in Sun Belt play. As of right now, the Georgia State Panthers are 4-3, and they are ranked 220th on KenPom. They have defeated Ball State, North Carolina Central, Tulsa, and then I believe Toccoa Falls, who is a Division II or an NAIA team. It does not have it listed here on KenPom. Their three losses, though, this season were to Mississippi State, Jacksonville State, and Austin Peay. They have yet to defeat a team so far this year that is ranked above 213th or higher on KenPom. Their best win being this past yesterday, against Tulsa. So they will play after a day of rest. They will go and play the Kentucky Wildcats. That is very stressful if I am Georgia State. So what do we know that they do well? Well, at 4-3, they're doing a decent job of getting to the foul line. In fact, I would argue that it's their greatest strength here, just looking at their roster. Right now, Georgia State is ranked 104th nationally in free throw to field goal attempt rate, meaning how many times are you getting to the foul line versus how many times are you taking a shot while the clock is still going. They do not do a great job of scoring at the free throw line, but they do a really good job of getting there. They're only shooting 68.9%, which is 232nd nationally, 75 points per game. They're finding ways to score despite a relatively average pace and some inefficiencies across the board on offense. But what I will say here is that Georgia State does do a good job of leaning into their physicality and, again, finding ways to get to the cherry stripe and then finishing through contact as well. They are currently ranked 44th nationally in average height. Their starting five includes 6'5", 6'7", 6'8", 6'10". They rotate two different guys at point guard, one of them being 6'4". Occasionally, they will put their three at their one. Very rarely. We'll talk about him in a second. He's a very important player to this team, and he's got a pretty interesting name as well. But yeah, that's kind of what Georgia State has been able to do well through their 4-3 start. Again, they haven't really faced anybody worth noting outside of Mississippi State, and they lost that game 101-66, which kind of maybe gives you an idea as to how this game could be going for the Wildcats tomorrow night. But this is still a young Georgia State team, I should say, as far as not necessarily in terms of experience, but in terms of where the program is currently at with Jonas Hayes. They need a little bit more time, I think, to grow and develop and kind of install what he wants to do, because right now they're not as good as they could potentially be. 75 points. Charity stripe is decent. They are tall. They are physical. They have been able to win games against opponents that, frankly, they should have beaten. Again, Ball State, Toccoa Falls, North Carolina Central, and Tulsa. That game at a neutral site against Tulsa, really important. We'll talk about something interesting about that Tulsa game here later on in the show, but that's kind of where we're at. And before we dive into like the individual players and everything and kind of what their rotation looks like, because their rotation is fascinating. I don't know if I've ever seen a rotation like this, and I'll explain it in a minute, but that's kind of where you're sitting. This Georgia State team also has a pretty difficult slate up ahead. They will play Kentucky tomorrow, again, at, I believe, 7 p.m. Eastern, and then they will play Auburn on December 17th, which, if you've seen what the Tigers have been doing, just running through the Maui Invitational Tournament, being incredibly dominant, it has been impressive. So Georgia State got their work cut out for them. They're going to have their work cut out for them in Rupp Arena tomorrow night. What do we know that the Georgia State Panthers struggle with, and how can maybe Kentucky take advantage of that? Let's talk about that in just a second. Before we do it, though, I want to tell you guys about our friends over at FanDuel. You can tackle the NFL action with FanDuel. It's America's #1 sports book, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL, and it's all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, you can view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That is over at FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, continuing along here on this Thanksgiving edition of Locked On Kentucky. Lance Dawe hanging out here with you. Thank you guys so much for checking out the show today. If you have not subscribed to the YouTube channel or the podcast feed, I would greatly appreciate it if you did so. Thank you guys so much to everyone who has joined the show over the past couple of years, that has been able to kind of hop on, see what's going on. I've had a couple of you guys, whenever I reached 14K, reach out to me on Twitter. Shout out Clint Darden, shout out a couple of the really nice people that have been kind and supportive over the 3+ years that I've been doing this, just reminding me about the journey. You know, it's that has taken place to get to 14,000 subs. You know, there was a time where I was sitting there thinking about what it was going to take to get to 100, what it was going to take to get to 300, how far away 1,000 subscribers felt. And it's just incredible and insane to see all you guys kind of stick around, watch the channel for so long. For those of you that are new, thank you guys so much for subscribing. This is, I think, going to be a very fun season for the Kentucky Wildcats, so there's no better time to join up, start talking about Kentucky basketball. I absolutely love it. I'm very thankful for you guys, very thankful for the show. I'm very thankful that we get to sit here today on Thanksgiving and get to preview a game that Kentucky is favored to win by a hefty amount, and that is a game against Georgia State. So we talked about what the Panthers do very well. We've talked about the foul line, their height. I want to dive into the individual players here and kind of talk about what their struggles are. To be completely honest with you, there's not a ton to really say positively about the 220th best team in the country, according to a computer ranking that I absolutely love, and that's KenPom. And I had one of you recently say that KenPom was outdated and Evan Mia was actually the place that you go. I look at Evan Mia. I like Evan Mia. I really like the kill shot metric and a couple of different stats that he has that other places don't. KenPom is not updated. That is just an objective fact, and the NCAA tournament would not continue to use it as such if it was outdated. The website looks like it is from the early 2000s. That's just simply how it is. Nothing about this as far as statistics, as far as analysis. It's definitely not outdated at all. Numbers will be numbers as far as I'm concerned with basketball. And yes, you can look at a variety of different places that could provide you information. I like KenPom. I do really, really like Evan Mia. I like Hasla on occasion whenever I go to do projections to see like kind of what teams would hypothetically match up against each other as. Mia also does a really good job of like projecting seeding if you want to go look and see kind of how things, Bart Torvik does a really good job of projecting seeding if you want to go do win-loss projections for every single team. There are a ton of different resources out there here for you. KenPom, I just find the easiest to read, and it's really great information, especially kind of providing basic stuff for myself and then for everyone out there to kind of dive into what we know and kind of see what teams are made of. So that's just kind of like my 2 cents on it. I love it. I hope you guys do too. I hope I don't talk about numbers too much. And we'll talk about, kind of the negatives here without really reading off number after number after number. Both their offense and their defense are not incredibly efficient. If you go and watch them on tape, you can see they're not a great shooting team. They're not a phenomenal defensive team, especially at the rim. They do a horrible job of turning teams over. Their average in terms of giving up turnovers themselves. They're average in terms of giving up steals. They're one of the worst teams in the country as far as it goes shooting inside the arc. So despite being tall, they struggle at the rim on both sides of the floor. Their effective field goal percentage is 250th nationally. The steal percentage and block percentage on defense, they do not play aggressive enough, it seems like, on D. And that's kind of where my analysis starts today. Gentlemen, they gave up 101 points to Mississippi State. That is not necessarily the best offense in the world. Now, it's definitely improved, especially compared to where it's been over the past couple of seasons underneath Chris Jans. But Mississippi State shot 72% inside the arc. They shot 35.5% outside, but they dominated inside the paint. Mississippi State did. I think you may see another game kind of like we saw at the beginning of the season with Wright State and Bucknell, where Kentucky was able to really take advantage of the rim because of how important it was for the opponent to kind of step out and guard the three-point line. Wright State overcommitted, in my opinion, and it led to a lot of backdoor stuff. It led to a lot of slips and cuts to the rim, and Kentucky scored a lot of points off of that. I think you're going to see something similar in this game against Tulsa. Maybe it's a little bit more difficult because of their height, but again, doesn't seem like they play incredibly aggressive defense, so you kind of take that with a grain of salt, I guess, of like how Kentucky's going to be able to attack and what their height, Georgia State's height is actually worth. Again, there's not a whole lot positive to talk about. If you want to talk individuals, which we will talk matchups, yet again, there is another forward here or another wing-type player that Kentucky's going to have to go out and guard up well, and that is Zariq Nutter. It's a really interesting name, Zariq Nutter. He is 6'7", 210 pounds, a senior. Previously at Northern Illinois, played 2 years there before transferring over to Georgia State. He dominates a lot of the possessions that Georgia State throws out there. He's 40th nationally in terms of percentage of possessions used, which is very, very high for an individual player. Keep in mind, there are like 2,400 players in D1 that are eligible for a national ranking. He's 40th. Only 39 players are utilized more than him. His assist rate is good. He does not play a whole lot of defense in terms of block or steal percentage, but he does a decent job of getting to the foul line, and he just shoots a ton of shots for them. It's at pretty inefficient splits. He averages 17 points per game, 4 rebounds, almost 3 assists. Bad splits. He's not taking a ton of threes. He's only made 1. And then inside the arc, he's only shooting 46.5%, which is really bad, especially for a 6'7" guy. But he is their guy that likes to take the volume shots. And it's just a matter of whether or not guys like Dawe, guys like Robinson, guys like Almanor, Carr, if you need to switch on to him, what they do against him in the mid-range and in the paint area. You've got to be able to maintain your physicality, and you got to make sure that he doesn't suddenly have a game where he's going 10 of 13 from the floor and he's dropped 25, 26 points on you. That is the big matchup, in my opinion, Zariq Nutter. And then you've also got Tenari Lane, who's averaging 15 2 and 1 on splits. He's shooting like 40% from the floor and 37.8% from beyond the arc, which is good. But 34.8% from beyond the arc, which is like good for a 6'5" player. It's like slightly above average. But again, subpar shooting inside the arc. They just haven't really been able to finish at the rim or shoot in the mid-range very well. Nutter and Lane are the two guys that I'm looking at here. They've got 4 guys in double figures. And here's what I wanted to talk about with this Tulsa rotation. This is fascinating to me. So you've got Nutter, you've got Lane. Those are 2 of your starting 5. You've got Caesar Edwards, who is your center at 6'10". You've got Nick Mullen, a 6'8" forward, and Malachi Brown, your 6'1" point guard, who starts there. Those guys essentially make up almost the entire rotation, your starting 5. This is the shortest rotation I've seen out of a team doing a preview, period. They are currently 363rd in bench minutes. And if you don't know where that ranks nationally, 363rd is dead last in Division I. Nobody plays their bench less than Georgia State. Versus Tulsa, which was a 74-71 win. They had 6 guys play double-digit minutes. Just 6. And all of their starting 5 played 30-plus minutes. In that game, they shot 18% from 3. But they did enough from the foul line, and they shot just well enough from inside the arc, and they were able to play a little bit of defense at the rim as well. It was a back-and-forth affair, and they were able to get a win. It's their best win of the year so far against Tulsa. They do not distribute the ball well. They turn the ball over a pretty decent amount. They don't shoot well. Their top 2 scorers are inefficient. They play one of the shortest rotations in the entire country. If Kentucky gets them into foul trouble, which Georgia State does a pretty good job of staying away from that. If they get into foul trouble, they have a problem. And that's kind of where my mind sits. I think Kentucky may be more aggressive than usual, attacking the rim. And on top of that, I think that they will get into their rotation and cause problems. So Kentucky, I think, is going to win this game. I think they're going to win this game pretty handily. 90-66 is what Kim Pom says. I think Kentucky tops 90 in this game. I'm going to go 95-65. That's kind of where most of my predictions have kind of fallen. Give me Kentucky. I predicted Kentucky 30 last time. I got that wrong. Won by 19, honestly. Kentucky should have won that game by 30 just because of the inefficient shooting. But anyway, give me the Cats by 30 in this one. Let me know what your score predictions are in the comments below. All right, so we have talked about the game, previewing it. I've got one more thing to talk about here with Mark It Down, ladies and gentlemen, with our little segment that we've been doing on YouTube. If you got to see that little sticker on YouTube, if you're watching there, I'm sure you heard it on podcast as well. Anyway, it's where we give a bold prediction for either the upcoming game or the upcoming 2-ish games that Kentucky will have on their schedule. I'm going to have one just for tomorrow's contest. Mark it down. Kentucky's going to have more than 10 steals versus Georgia State. 10 or more is where I sit. Right now, Kentucky's average in terms of steal percentage. They average 7.5 steals per game. Georgia State, not great. Underneath average in terms of turnover percentage. Average in terms of steal percentage. They didn't turn the ball over a ton against Tulsa. They didn't turn the ball over a ton in terms of steals against Mississippi State, but they coughed up 17 turnovers, 5 steals, which is really interesting. I don't wonder what was going on there. I will take Kentucky 10-plus steals in this game. I think they're going to be aggressive. I think they're going to be able to pick some pockets. There's not a ton of distributing going on this roster for Georgia State. They struggle to pass the rock. I think Kentucky will take advantage of that, get out and run. That is my prediction for one more time. Mark it down. I like playing the little sticker because I think it's funny. All right, that's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Kentucky. Hey, you can follow the show on Twitter at LockedOnUK. You can follow me on Twitter at Lance_. And you can follow the show over on Instagram. That is at Kentucky Podcast. Any questions, comments, concerns, leave those in the YouTube comments below. Hit me on the socials. I will see you all tomorrow for another episode of Locked On Kentucky. Happy Thanksgiving, everybody, and God bless.